your peonies were the stars of your garden about 3 weeks ago. Huge, full, heavy blooms that made the whole border worth walking out to see in the morning. The kind of flowers that stop your neighbor in the middle of mowing so they can lean over the fence and tell you how gorgeous they look. Pink ones, white ones, those deep burgundy doubles that smell like something between roses and fresh rain. For about 2 weeks in late May or early June, a peony bush in full bloom is one of the most beautiful things a garden can produce. And now look at it. The petals have turned brown and papery. Some of the flower heads are drooping so low they are touching the mulch. The stems that held up those massive blooms are bending sideways under their own weight, flopping across your garden path or smothering the daylilies next to them. The whole plant looks exhausted, like it gave everything it had, and now it just wants to be left alone. So the temptation is to leave it alone. Or worse, to grab the pruning shears and cut the whole thing back to the ground so the bed looks tidy again. Both of those instincts will cost you flowers next spring. What you do in the next 8 weeks, right now through mid-September, determines whether your peonies produce more blooms or fewer blooms next May. Bigger flowers or smaller flowers? A bush that gets better every year or a bush that slowly, quietly declines until you are standing over it wondering what went wrong? What nobody knew, or at least what nobody talks about, is that one of the 6 things on this list is the single reason most peonies go from spectacular in their 3rd or 4th year to disappointing by their 7th. It happens so gradually that people blame age. They blame the weather. They blame the soil. It is none of those things. And once you understand what it actually is, you will never make that mistake again. Here are all 6 in the order you do them, starting today. Number 1. Deadhead the spent flowers right now. Walk outside today, right after this video if you can, and look at your peony bush. Every brown flower head still sitting on the plant is working against you. The bush does not know those flowers are ugly to you. As far as the plant is concerned, those faded blooms have one job left to do, and that job is making seeds. The energy that could be traveling down the stem and into the root system, building next year's flower buds underground, is instead being funneled upward into seed pods that you will never plant, never harvest, never use for anything. So you cut them off, but you have to cut them off the right way. Follow each spent flower stem down from the brown bloom at the top, until you reach the first set of strong, healthy leaves. Cut just above that leaf junction, not at the base of the plant and not halfway down the stem, but right above the first good set of leaves. This keeps the maximum amount of foliage intact while removing the energy drain of seed production. Do this for every spent bloom on the bush. Some plants will have a dozen or more, depending on the variety and the age of the clump. Each one you remove is a small redirection of energy back to where it matters most, down into the root crown sitting just below the soil surface. And here is the part that matters more than the deadheading itself. While you are out there with your pruning shears, do not cut a single leaf. Leave the yellowing ones, the spotted ones, even the ugly ones at the bottom that are flopping on the ground. Every leaf stays on the plant. This is not optional, and it's not about being lazy or letting the garden look messy for a few months. This connects directly to number 2, and number 2 is the one that changes everything. Number 2, the foliage rule that saves next year's bloom. This is the one. This is the reason most established peonies decline. Not disease, not soil problems, not age, not bad luck with the weather. The number 1 reason a healthy peony produces fewer and smaller flowers each year is that someone cut the foliage too early. Think about it for a second. After the flowers are gone, what is the peony bush actually doing for the rest of the summer? It looks like nothing, right? It is just a mound of green leaves sitting in the border, taking up space, not producing any flowers, not doing anything obviously productive. The leaves start spreading outward. Some of them get brown spots from rain splash. The bush occupies premium real estate in your garden bed and offers nothing in return. Every gardening instinct in your body says to cut it back, tidy it up, make room for the summer annuals, and get the border looking presentable for the rest of the season. If you act on that instinct, you are stealing next May's flowers. Those peony leaves are working harder right now, in July, than they were when the blooms were open in June. every leaf on that plant is photosynthesizing, pulling sunlight and carbon dioxide from the air and converting it into chemical energy. That energy travels down through the stems and into the root crown, which is the thick, fleshy mass of roots and buds sitting just underground at the base of the plant. The root crown is where next year's flower buds are forming right now, not next spring, right now, underground, invisible, completely hidden from you. The peony is building the buds that will push up through the soil next April and open into flowers next May. More leaves means more photosynthesis, means more energy flowing into the crown, means more buds forming underground, means more flowers next spring. The equation is that simple and it is that unforgiving. When you cut the foliage in July or August because it looks messy, you are shutting down the factory that builds next year's blooms. The crown gets less energy. Fewer buds form. The ones that do form are smaller and weaker. Next May, instead of 15 or 20 big blooms, you get 8 or 10 smaller ones. So you wonder if the plant is getting old, or if the soil is depleted, or if you need to move it to a sunnier spot. You do not connect the decline to that afternoon in July when you tidied up the garden with a pair of hedge shears. The gardeners who have spectacular peonies year after year, the ones with bushes that produce 30 blooms on a single plant, they all follow the same rule. Leave every leaf on the plant until it dies naturally. The foliage will start turning yellow on its own sometime in October or November, depending on where you live and when your first hard frost arrives. That yellowing is the plant's signal that it is done photosynthesizing for the year. The energy transfer is complete. The crown is fully loaded with next year's buds. That is when you cut it back, not a day before. Clean up the debris, and the crown goes into winter dormancy with a full tank of fuel. Do this every year, and your peony will bloom better at age 20 than it did at age 5. Number 3. Feed the crown right now. The root crown is building next year's buds underground during July and August. Those buds need fuel, and the foliage can only provide part of it. The soil needs to contribute too. Take a handful of balanced granular fertilizer. A 10-10-10 formula works well. Bulb fertilizer works well too. Anything with roughly equal parts nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium will do the job. Scratch it into the soil around the base of the peony, starting from the main stems and working outward to the drip line, which is the outer edge of where the leaves reach. Then water it in deeply. Not a light sprinkle, a thorough soaking that pushes the nutrients down into the root zone where the crown can actually absorb them. One thing to avoid: do not use a high nitrogen fertilizer on peonies after bloom. Those formulas with a first number much higher than the other two, like a 25-5 lawn fertilizer, will push the plant to produce lush, abundant foliage at the expense of flower buds. You get a beautiful green bush and a disappointing bloom. Balanced or phosphorus-heavy formulas direct the energy toward bud formation, which is exactly what the crown needs right now. This early July feeding is the first of 2 for the entire year. The second one comes in September, and we will talk about that later. 2 feedings per year, that is the entire fertilizer schedule for peonies. They are not heavy feeders. They do not need monthly applications or fancy organic tea blends or complicated soil amendment programs. 2 handfuls of balanced fertilizer, scratched into the soil and watered in, about 10 weeks apart. The Amish grandmothers who grew peonies along every farmhouse fence in Lancaster County did exactly this, and those same plants are still blooming 80 years later. Simple and consistent is what works. Fancy does not work better. Number 4. Support the foliage through summer. Now that you understand why the leaves need to stay on the plant until fall, you also understand why it matters that those leaves are positioned well. A peony leaf lying flat on the ground, pressed against the mulch or smothering a neighboring plant, is not photosynthesizing efficiently. Leaves produce the most energy when they are angled upward, catching full sun across their entire surface. After the heavy blooms drop, peony stems tend to flop outward. The stems were bred to hold enormous flowers, and once those flowers are gone, the stems lose their upright structure and splay in every direction. This is normal. It does not mean the plant is unhealthy. It means gravity is doing what gravity does to stems that were carrying 8-ounce blooms 2 weeks ago. The fix is a grow-through support ring. If you installed peony cages in early spring when the red shoots were first poking through the soil, you are already set. The foliage is growing up through the grid, and the stems are held in a loose, upright position. If you did not install supports in spring, you can still do it now. Push a hoop-style support ring into the soil around the clump, then gently lift the stems and thread them up through the ring. Be careful not to snap any stems or tear any leaves while you do this. This is not about making the garden look pretty, although it does help with that. This is about keeping the leaf surface angled toward the afternoon sun for maximum energy production. Every leaf that catches direct sunlight instead of lying in the shade of its own neighbors contributes more energy to the root crown below. Over the course of July and August, the difference between supported upright foliage and collapsed ground level foliage translates directly into the number of buds forming underground. If you are finding this helpful, hit subscribe. Every week, there is a new video covering old-fashioned gardening techniques that actually work, the kind of knowledge that used to get passed down over the back fence and is disappearing now that everyone wants shortcuts. So, we have covered the first 4 tasks. Deadhead the flowers, protect the foliage, feed the crown, and support the stems so the leaves catch sunlight. Those 4 things happen right now, this week, in early July. But the next 2 tasks are the ones that separate good peony care from the kind of care that keeps a plant blooming for 30 or 40 years in the same spot. Number 5. Check for Botrytis blight and clean the base of the plant. Botrytis is the most common disease affecting peonies, and wet weather in June and July is what triggers it. If your area had a rainy spring or early summer, your peonies may already be showing signs. Look for grey, fuzzy mold on the spent flower heads you just deadheaded. Check the leaves for brown spots that seem to spread outward from the center. Look at the base of the stems where they emerge from the soil. If any stems have turned brown and mushy at the base, or if a stem has collapsed and fallen over even though it looks fine higher up, Botrytis is very likely the cause. Here is what you do. Cut off any infected stem all the way to the ground. Not halfway down, all the way. Remove every infected leaf and every piece of plant debris from around the base of the clump. Fallen petals, old flower parts, dead leaves from last year that you might have missed during spring cleanup. All of it goes into a bag, and that bag goes in the trash. Do not put Botrytis-infected material in your compost pile. The spores survive composting and will reinfect your plants next year when you spread that compost back onto the garden. A clean base is the single best defense against Botrytis coming back year after year. The spores overwinter on dead plant material sitting on the soil surface around the crown. If you remove all that material in July and again during the fall cleanup in November, you break the cycle. The crown emerges clean in spring, and the new shoots push up through bare soil instead of through a layer of infected debris. If the infection is widespread, with multiple stems affected and mold visible on healthy foliage, spray the remaining healthy leaves with a copper-based fungicide. Follow the label rates. Spray on a dry morning so the leaves have time to dry before nightfall. Wet leaves at night are Botrytis's best friend, so anything you can do to keep the foliage dry during evening hours helps. This includes watering at the base of the plant instead of overhead, and making sure there is adequate air circulation around the clump. Dense, crowded plantings with poor airflow around the stems and leaves are Botrytis magnets. If your peony is squeezed between other plants in a tight cottage garden border, consider thinning the neighbors slightly to let air move through the foliage during humid summer weather. Number 6. Know when your peony needs dividing and when it does not. This is the one that gets people into trouble because the internet is full of conflicting advice about peony division. Some sources say divide every 3 to 5 years. Others say never divide. The truth depends entirely on how your specific plant is performing. A healthy peony in the right spot, meaning full sun or close to it with decent drainage, does not need dividing on a regular schedule. Unlike iris, which get overcrowded and stop blooming after a few years, or daylilies that form dense clumps that need splitting to stay vigorous, peonies are perfectly content to grow in the same spot undisturbed for decades. 20 years without division is normal, 30 years is not unusual. There are documented peony specimens in old cemetery plantings and abandoned farmsteads that have been blooming without any human care for 50 years or more. So do not dig up your peony just because someone told you perennials need dividing. If your plant is producing healthy blooms and the clump looks vigorous, leave it alone. But if your peony has been producing fewer and smaller flowers each year, and you have been following all the rules we just talked about, leaving the foliage until fall, feeding twice a year, cleaning up debris, then the problem might be an overcrowded crown. When a peony clump gets very old and very dense, the center of the crown becomes so packed with roots and bud eyes that the outermost buds cannot access enough energy to produce full-size blooms. The plant is not dying. It is just too crowded for its own good. Division is the reset button, and the only window for doing it is September, never in midsummer and never in spring. Wait until the foliage has started to yellow, which signals that the plant has finished its energy transfer for the year. Dig the entire clump by pushing a garden fork straight down in a circle about 12 inches out from the center of the plant. Lever the whole root mass out of the ground, shake off the soil or rinse it with a hose so you can see the root structure clearly. What you are looking at is a mass of thick, fleshy, carrot-like roots with pink or red pointed buds at the top. Those pointed buds are the bud eyes, and each one has the potential to become a flowering stem next spring. Cut the clump into sections with a sharp, clean knife. Each section needs 3 to 5 bud eyes and a good portion of healthy root attached. Too few bud eyes, and the division will take years to build up enough strength to bloom. Too many, and you have not really solved the overcrowding problem. Now here is the depth rule, and this is critical. When you replant each division, the bud eyes must sit 1 to 2 inches below the soil surface, not deeper. Peonies planted too deep will not bloom. This is the second most common reason for peony failure, right behind cutting the foliage too early. The reason is biological. Peony bud eyes need to experience a sustained period of cold during winter to trigger the hormonal response that produces spring growth and flowering. At the correct depth, they feel the full force of winter cold. The freezing temperatures penetrate the soil, surround the buds, and deliver the chill hours the plant requires. When those same buds are buried 4 or 5 inches deep, the soil insulates them too well. They never get cold enough for long enough. The plant pushes up green foliage in spring because the leaves do not require the same cold trigger, but the flower buds never develop properly. You get a lush green bush with 0 flowers, or maybe 1 or 2 small stunted blooms that never fully open. Year after year, the same result: foliage but no flowers. If you have a peony that grows healthy leaves every spring but never blooms, and it has been in the ground for more than 3 years, check the planting depth before you do anything else. Carefully scrape soil away from the crown in September until you can see where the bud eyes sit. If they are more than 2 inches below the soil surface, the fix is simple. Dig the entire plant, set it back in the same hole at the correct depth, with the bud eyes just an inch or 2 down, backfill with the original soil, and water deeply. That single adjustment has turned non-blooming peonies into 20-bloom specimens the very next spring. Mark the depth with your finger before you backfill. Press your index finger into the soil beside the bud eye. If your finger disappears past the first knuckle, the bud is too deep. Just the tip of your finger to the first crease. That is your planting gauge. Old-timers used to say you should be able to brush the soil away and touch the bud eyes with your fingernail. That is about right. One more thing about September, because September is quietly the most important month of the peony's year, even though nothing visible is happening above ground. In early September, give the plant its second and final feeding. Same balanced fertilizer you used in July. Same method. Scratched into the soil around the drip line and watered in. This September feeding is the one that gets forgotten because the plant looks like it is done for the year. The blooms are long gone by then. The foliage is starting to look tired. The garden is shifting its attention to fall mums and asters and the last of the tomato harvest. But underground, the peony root system is working harder than it has at any other point in the season. The roots are actively growing, absorbing nutrients, and packing the last reserves of energy into the crown before the ground freezes and everything shuts down for winter. That September feeding is like filling the gas tank before a long drive. The plant will coast on that fuel from November through April, and when the red shoots finally push through the cold spring soil, the energy that powers those shoots came from what the roots absorbed in September. That is the last thing your peony needs from you before winter. Everything from here is about cleanup. And then November, you will know the moment has arrived because you will walk out one morning after the first real freeze, and the peony foliage will look completely different. The leaves that were green and functional just a week ago have turned yellow, then golden brown, and the stems have softened and started collapsing toward the ground. Some of the leaves will already be lying flat on the mulch. The whole bush looks like it has simply given up, and in a way, it has. The above-ground portion of the year is finished. The crown has received everything the foliage had to give. Now, and only now, is the time to cut everything back. Cut every stem to about 2 inches above ground level. A pair of hand pruners works fine for most clumps. For larger, older plants with woody stems at the base, you might need loppers. Cut cleanly. Do not leave ragged, torn edges that invite disease into the crown. Then clean up everything around the base. Rake up every fallen leaf, every stem piece, every brown petal fragment that has been sitting on the mulch since June. All of it goes in a trash bag, not the compost bin. You already know why from the Botrytis section. Fungal pathogens love dead plant material, and leaving it around the crown through winter is an invitation for problems in spring. If you garden in zones 3 through 5, where winter temperatures regularly drop below zero, apply a 2-inch layer of mulch over the crown after cutting back. Straw, shredded leaves, or pine needles all work. This insulates the crown just enough to prevent frost heaving, which is when repeated freezing and thawing cycles push the crown upward out of the soil. If the crown heaves above the surface, the bud eyes lose their soil cover and can be damaged by extreme cold and wind. In zone 6 and warmer, winter mulch is optional. The ground does not freeze deeply enough to cause heaving, and the crown is naturally insulated by the soil above it. So that is the complete list. 6 things, done in the right order at the right time. Deadhead the spent flowers this week. Leave every leaf on the plant from now until fall. Feed the crown in July and again in September. Support the stems so the foliage stays upright in the sun. Clean up botrytis and debris at the base. And if your peony has been declining despite good care, divide in September with the bud eyes no more than 2 inches below the surface. A peony that receives this care does not fade with age. It does not produce fewer flowers each year. It does the opposite. A well-maintained peony in good soil and full sun produces more blooms at 15 years old than it did at 5. At 20 years, it becomes the anchor of the entire garden border, the plant that everything else is arranged around. At 30 years, it is a living heirloom, a piece of the garden that outlasts the house paint, outlasts the fence, outlasts the trees you planted in the same decade. Your grandmother knew this. The women who grew peonies along every farmhouse porch and picket fence in this country 100 years ago did not have YouTube videos or soil testing kits or fancy slow-release fertilizer granules. They had sharp shears, a coffee can of bone meal, and the patience to leave a plant alone when it did not look pretty. An Amish farmwife in Pennsylvania would deadhead her peonies in June, feed the soil in July, and not touch the bush again until the first hard frost turned the leaves brown. She did not read a label. She did not watch a tutorial. She just repeated what her mother taught her, and her mother before that, and those plants bloomed decade after decade without fail. That patience, that willingness to let the foliage do its work, even when the garden looks messy in July, is the only real secret to peonies that bloom for a lifetime. How many blooms did your peonies produce this year? Tell me in the comments and tell me how old your plant is. Those 2 numbers together tell the whole health story. And if the number of blooms has been going down over the last few years, now you know exactly what to do about it. Click the video on screen for more old-fashioned gardening techniques that keep heritage plants thriving for generations.